Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to leave the back rooms of restaurants, the shadowed pews of Sunday churches, and the whispered confessions behind prison glass. If you think you know the Mafia, if you believe it was built by men alone, then you've been watching the wrong movie. In the next 20 minutes, you will meet the real architects of America's most notorious crime families, the women who held empires together with loyalty, silence, and blood. Make sure to subscribe, because what you're about to hear is a story most men in the life would rather take to the grave. Now let's begin. They say the Mafia was built by men with guns. But ask any old soldier who survived long enough to tell the truth, and he'll lean in close, lower his voice, and tell you the same thing. It was the women who kept us alive. They managed the money. They hid the weapons. They negotiated peace. They delivered the messages no man could carry without starting a war. They were the backbone no FBI agent ever saw coming. This is the story of the invisible power behind America's most notorious crime dynasty. Before a boy becomes a soldier, before a soldier becomes a capo, there is always a mother, and in the Mafia, mothers were more than caretakers. They were strategists. Maria Ventresca was one of them. In the narrow streets of Brooklyn, Maria raised 3 sons who would become soldiers for the old country's traditions. But what the FBI never wrote in their reports is simple. Maria ran the crew long before her boys were old enough to shave. She kept the business hidden behind a bakery. She handled the numbers in a little notebook nobody dared to touch. And when the police came knocking, she offered them espresso and a smile warm enough to melt steel. Maria wasn't just a mother, she was the first consigliere. You think the Mafia grew powerful because of fear? No, it grew powerful because women like Maria taught their sons discipline, loyalty, and silence. While the men ran rackets on the streets, another kind of power quietly grew in the luxury apartments above them. Her name was Isabella Marino. Married to a mid-level capo, Isabella saw what the men couldn't, the future. She understood that the Mafia wasn't just about territory, it was about influence, politics, real estate, unions. So, she built her own empire. She hosted fundraisers for local politicians, raised money for judges and councilmen, and made sure every handshake came with a reminder of where the loyalty should lie. The men believed they were charming the politicians, but Isabella, she was the one writing the guest list. While the bosses played cards in smoky back rooms, she was buying them immunity, one handshake at a time. When a boss goes to prison, he becomes a ghost, cut off from the world, surrounded by enemies, his voice silenced. Unless he has a woman on the outside. The wives, the sisters, the girlfriends, they became the lifeline. Inside visiting rooms, they passed coded messages folded in napkins, hidden in shoes, tucked inside the seams of jackets. They carried orders from the highest men to the lowest soldiers. One woman, Teresa Romano, kept an entire family alive during a 6-year federal crackdown. She visited 3 prisons a week, each time dressed like she was going to Sunday Mass. Nobody suspected her, until the end. A guard finally asked her, "Why do you visit so often?" She smiled and said, "Family." And that was the truth, just not the part he needed to hear. There were moments in Mafia history when a man's death should have ended everything, but instead, a woman stepped forward. In 1984, After the murder of Vincent Little Vinny DeSoto, everyone expected his crew to fall apart. Vinny had no sons, no brothers, no heir. What they didn't count on was Rosa DeSoto. She buried her husband on a Thursday. On Friday, she walked into the club Vinny had ruled for years. Every man in that room stood up when she entered, out of respect or fear. Nobody knew which. Rosa didn't ask, she commanded. She pointed at the man who pulled the trigger, and within a week, he disappeared. His whole crew followed. Under Rosa's leadership, the family grew stronger than before. Rumor had it she never carried a gun. She didn't have to. She carried loyalty, and in this world, that's deadlier. See, law enforcement always looked for the men in suits, the men in tracksuits, the men with the gold chains. But they never looked at the woman folding laundry in the kitchen. They never questioned the woman taking out the trash. They never suspected the woman paying the bills. These women hid money, cooked the books, and kept operations alive while the men took the spotlight. One FBI agent once said, "We weren't hunting lions. We should have been hunting lionesses." It took decades before the Bureau finally realized the truth. For every Mafia boss arrested, a woman quietly stepped in to keep the gears turning. Today, the Mafia isn't what it used to be. The guns are quieter. The meetings happen in restaurants that serve $200 pasta. The violence is strategic, not chaotic. But one thing hasn't changed. Women still hold the keys. Some run the finances of multi-million-dollar construction companies tied to old family money. Some manage unions from behind the scenes. Some make investments that keep the old bloodlines alive without ever touching the streets. They're not victims. They're not bystanders. They're the hidden CEOs of criminal empires. But power always has a price. Many of these women buried husbands, brothers, or sons. Others lived decades with phones tapped, doors watched, and neighbors whispering behind curtains. Some never slept a full night again. The Mafia gave them power, but it demanded their lives in return. And yet they stayed loyal to the family, to the code, to the legacy. Not because they loved crime, but because they loved the men who chose it. So the next time someone tells you the Mafia was built by ruthless men who carved their names into the streets of New York, Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia, tell them the truth. Behind every made man was a woman who built the world he ruled, a woman who protected the secrets, a woman who carried the burden, a woman who kept the empire alive while the men fought, bled, and died. The Mafia may never rise again the way it once did, but the women who shaped it, their influence is still felt in every story, every rumor, every shadow that refuses to fade. If you want more untold stories, more investigations, and more hidden truths behind America's criminal underworld, hit subscribe now, because the next story is even darker and even more real.